Hello, everybody. Welcome to Pro Wrestling Spotlight Live. No, I am not John Arezzi. This is Alex Robertson here. Many of you may recognize me from my new segment that I do with John every single week. Today, I will be substituting for him, praying that everything is going to go well. I'm looking forward to doing this show with you guys. I have a ton in store for you. So as I mentioned, John is away this week. He is traveling, but he will be with us next week. Looking forward to hearing about his travel adventures, I'm sure. So what we have on the show today, I have two very, very important guests that are going to be joining me. One is to talk about a recent news story that's actually on slamwrestling.net as of today, and you can find it on our news page. And we will be talking about not only a brother who is from Montreal, he is probably the brother of one of my favorite all-time wrestlers. So I'm very much looking forward to that conversation. And I also have a local wrestler from here in Montreal that I work with at International Wrestling Syndicate here in Montreal. And he is going to join us to talk about everything wrestling and how much he actually misses being in the ring. I know I miss going to live shows. I know all of you miss going to live shows. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. So as I said, normally every week I do the news. That doesn't change this week. I will be doing the news this week as well. So the first thing that I want to talk about, some very sad news that we got today. Larry King passed away. And why I'm mentioning it is because he was actually a very big wrestling fan. I was reading a lot about him today, and going back into the 80s and 90s, he actually interviewed people like Hulk Hogan and The Rock, and they really seemed to take a liking to him, and they really opened up to him. And Larry King was one of, the journalists when the whole incident with Chris Benoit happened, when Hulk Hogan's son got into a car accident. He acted more as an investigative journalist and really tried to get down to the bottom of things. So I know that the wrestling world and the entertainment world in general is hurting today. So many prayers go out to his family. So some other stuff that caught my eye this week, we heard at the beginning of the week, or maybe at the end of the week, last week, that the WrestleManias for the next 3 years have been announced. So we know that this past year in 2020, had the pandemic not happened, it would have been in Tampa, Florida. So that's where it's supposed to be this year. Now, I'm not really confident that that's going to happen. I mean, we're still going through this pandemic. Who knows where we're going to be in April? Fingers crossed, though. Hopefully we will get there. And for WrestleMania 38, which will take place next year, it'll be in Arlington, Texas at AT&T Stadium. Very cool. And then WrestleMania 39 will be in Los Angeles, California at Sophie Stadium. So it's kind of interesting that the WWE has decided to announce where they will have their WrestleManias for the next few years. But nonetheless, very much to look forward to. And I want to go over this whole AEW Impact partnership that's been going on. Because initially when it first started, everyone was very excited. We started seeing Kenny Omega go on Impact tapings. And then we saw the Good Brothers make appearance on AEW's Dynamite every week. So we weren't really sure what was going on there. This week, however, we got a little bit more of a taste of what's going on. So we saw Matt Hardy and Private Party actually make an appearance in the ring with Impact. And although it kind of may have turned into something exciting, it didn't really do much for their ratings, which I would like to say that I'm not surprised, but I kind of am. I think if this partnership is really going to come into fruition, I think that they need to push a little bit harder. And it's going to take more than Tony Khan making an appearance ringside. Speaking of ringside, I don't know if anybody else noticed, but I heard some fans at the Impact taping. I don't know if it was their wrestlers, very similar to what we're seeing with AEW in the very beginning anyway, where they just allowed their wrestlers to be ringside. But maybe we're starting to see a little bit more. But nonetheless, I mean, I think that these partnerships that are happening in wrestling are very cool. I think that this could be something very interesting, but I think that it's going to take a little bit more work before we get there. Another very exciting news that happened this week, at least for the female wrestling side, we heard that NXT has a few more signees. They've signed Zoe Stark, formerly known as Lacey Ryan, Gigi Dolan, who is Priscilla Kelly. Now, Priscilla Kelly is, I've watched her for many years. I've had the opportunity to speak with her. Very, very hardworking woman. All three of them are. And Cora Jade, which was Elena Black, and she has also made some appearances on AEW. So congratulations to those three women. Very happy for you. And going back a little bit to WWE, this week we saw Drew McIntyre make somewhat of an appearance on Raw. And a lot of us, I guess, were questioning in the beginning, you know, him being diagnosed with COVID-19, but having no symptoms. Was he going to wrestle at the Royal Rumble because he was due to face Goldberg? Now, everyone is kind of saying, and the WWE hasn't really ruled it out, that they're going to cancel the match altogether. Actually, they said it was going to go forward. So very interesting, although I don't know how I would feel getting into a ring with somebody who's been diagnosed with COVID-19, but nonetheless, that match is still going to go on. And I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I've always loved seeing Goldberg in the ring. I love when they bring former legends back. I think it adds a lot to the card. And we saw that on Legends Night a couple of weeks ago with Raw, that actually did wonders for their ratings. So I know ratings aren't everything. And I know, you know, the WWE has a long way to go for them to kind of up their game a little bit, but I do think it's somewhat interesting. And speaking of the Royal Rumble, we'll actually be touching on that a little bit later on in the show. And I have an interesting story for you about my prediction last year and the show itself last year. So at the end of the show, we're going to talk about that. And if any of you have any indication as to who you think is going to win the Royal Rumble for the men or for the women, please let me know in the chat. I would love to hear who you think is going to take it this year. So that's going to be happening next Sunday. So very interesting. I mean, it's the lead off to WrestleMania. It's the beginning of the road to WrestleMania and arguably their second biggest pay-per-view of the year. So we'll see. We'll see what kind of surprises. Are they going to bring former wrestlers back as they did last year with Edge? We will see. One rumor that I did hear is that former footballer Fernando Torres will be making his WWE debut at the Royal Rumble. Now, he's 36. He started his career in soccer as a striker in Madrid and then played for Chelsea. So we know that he's an athlete and we know that he could probably handle his own. I'm never worried about adding more athletes into the mix. I mean, we've seen UFC fighters on both the men and the women's side come in. So I guess anything is really possible at that point. Another exciting piece of news coming out of the WWE via Renee Young, who is my role model. We heard that WWE Backstage is coming back on January 30th, right before the Royal Rumble, which is very exciting. It's going to be on at 8 p.m. on FS1. So all of you that can view that, I suggest you do. She will be joined with Booker T and Paige. I know that I used to watch it when it was on before it got canceled, and it was really sad to see it go. And I think many of us thought that Renee Young was going to be completely done with the WWE for now. But she's making her reappearance back on the show. So that should be one to watch for sure. Yeah, Daniel Bryan going back to the Royal Rumble and Bianca Belair. Honestly, that was probably two of my top. I would say Bianca Belair probably has a good chance of stealing that one there. But again, keep those comments coming, guys. I will be discussing that at the end of the show. So before I move on to the next segment, I mentioned off the top that we will be joined by Donny Laible, who will be talking about his new piece that came out today on slamwrestling.net. And just before I bring him on, this was very interesting. So we're going to be talking about Butcher. And I was a big fan of Mad Dog. And you were probably going to look at me and say, Mad Dog, really? Aren't you like 12? Actually, I used to read a lot about wrestling before I really started to avidly watch it. And I read about his life in the territory days. And being from Montreal, I thought it was super cool, the life that he led and the path that he paved for his family later down the road. And it's actually really cool that Don got to sit down and talk to his brother. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Donny Laible on the show so he can talk about it.
Hey,
hi,
how are
John.
you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm glad you brought up Mad Dog. I like to explain my Mad Dog moment. About 30 years ago, the Cauliflower Alley Club was having a regional banquet in Springfield, Massachusetts, and the Butcher and Mad Dog made the drive down from Quebec through Vermont. And they were saying that people were recognizing them on the road and constantly, pointing them out because you couldn't miss what they looked like with their, the bald head, the wonderfully groomed beards. And so they're mingling with the other people there. Gorilla Monsoon, Pedro Morales, Luthez was there. And I said, at the time I wanted to write a story for Wrestling Eye magazine on the Vachons. So I had them come up to my room, and the room was really warm. It was cold out, whatnot. And they're taking their jackets off, and the sweat's coming down their head. And next thing I know, Mad Dog is sitting there going, Jesus, it's so cold. It's so hot in here. He took his leg off and laid it on the bed. And it caught me by such surprise because you don't expect someone to take a limb off during a conversation. And I had to stop. I was recording that. And I realized that he got a good laugh out of it. I'm sure it's not the first time he did that. But Mad Dog was really an amazing guy. He wasn't very big, maybe 5'10", but he was just solid. And they were so pleasant, such a, not full of himself, not having to be in his, I've been around guys that always had to be in their character and whatnot. And Mad Dog was just such a sweetheart. He walked around with a cane, and Paul did the driving. So just recently, I like to connect with people that were very impressionable for me years ago. And the Vachons were. And I used to see Paul because when he worked for the WWF, he came through several times up until about 1984. And I had one time when I was in Springfield, Massachusetts, and he had his wife, I believe it was his second wife with him, and her and her daughter, which he was his stepdaughter. Mm-hmm. And after the matches, we went over a friend's house. And she was probably about 13 years old, and it was Luna. But it was before she was Luna. She was Trudy. And I never forget how sweet and innocent she looked. And then years later, when I saw her come into the ring, it's like, whoa.
Right. I had the same reaction.
But such nice people. So I found Butcher. He lives... as he says, he could look out his window and see the property that he grew up on. It's just across the border of North Troy, Vermont, where his sister, the late Vivian Vachon, was born. And he hasn't been in the very best of health in years. He's had colon cancer. He had open heart surgery. He had throat cancer. He's diabetic. I mean, he's had a rough time. But his wife, Dee, is a super lady. She encourages people to contact him to talk about the old days because he doesn't get around very much. And so I said, let me have 15 minutes of time with him. She goes, don't rush. Well, we ended up talking for about an hour and a half. And the more you talk, like any conversation, you bring up more names. It brings up more memories. So it was wonderful to catch up with him.
Definitely. And I think I read in your piece, he does a pretty cool thing every year at Christmas, does he not?
Yeah, for 20 years, he crossed the border into a mall in Berlin, Vermont. It's probably about an hour's drive from his home, and he would play Santa Claus at a mall. Well, of course, this year with COVID, they didn't have a live Santa Claus, but what they did have was a 55-inch screen TV. They had an elf there, and then Paul was Santa Claus from his home. And the pictures are priceless of him. If you go to his fan page on Facebook, you could see them. And I mean, that really connects with him with still, I think, with fans, with the children. You know, once a performer, you're always a performer. And it's funny. He's telling me how, you know, as we're talking, he goes, you know, I'm exercising as we talk. I go, oh, really? And he's cycling, and he says, you know, I work out 2 hours a day. From what he can, he's 83 or so, something along those lines. Wow. But you know, you never get tired of seeing your heroes, like you're talking about when you used to look at the magazines and whatnot. Yeah. Years ago, they used to sometimes, some people were a little smarmy and say, "Oh, you're a mark." You know, you see this person, you get all excited. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's your hero. You know, somebody you saw on television, or somebody that may have said 2 words to you at an arena and they become your favorites. So when I see Paul Vachon, I think of him when I saw him in Albany, New York at small Armories Wrestling. I saw him at Madison Square Garden. I saw him at the Spectrum in Philadelphia. So when you get to spend time with these people and you see that they're real people and you get behind the scenes with them, it's just a wonderful experience.
Definitely. And I think I also read in your piece that you mentioned the WFAI.
Oh, yes.
Convention. So those were conventions that were back in the 70s. So they're probably not what they are today.
Sure.
So what were they like back then?
Well, the WFIA stood for Wrestling Fans International Association. And every year someone would say, all right, I'll host it. They did all the work of getting the hotel and trying to talk to the local promoters. Because remember back then, I tell people wrestling was like Major League Baseball, where you had a team in every city. Well, you had, you know, 30 promotions throughout the country, their home promotions. And somebody would set it up. It was Detroit. It was in Boston. It was in Miami. And remember, there were no newsletter. There were, you know, no internet or anything. So you only read things from newsletters once a month people put out. So in Boston in 1975, I remember wrestling was so closed back then too. Yeah. It was in Boston, and adjacent to the Boston Garden was a hotel, the Madison Motor Inn. And WWF would not send anybody there because, you know, God forbid you had a heel come to a convention. That was unheard of. And the Grand Wizard, the Ernie Roth, the late wrestling manager, lived in Boston. He came there, and he was just a gem of a person. And I was so excited to see him in person, because if you saw them on the street or whatever, they probably wouldn't stop for you, I mean, because they had to stay in character. And Ernie was wonderful to everybody. And on the last day of the convention, literally people were packing up the room. Paul Vachon came over. He was wrestling on the show at the Boston Garden, and he came to meet the fans, and everybody stopped putting things away, and he answered questions, had a question and answer session with him. And it was just somebody who reading the magazines, and he's got the big cigar, the 3-piece suit on with the vest, of course. It was wonderful. And I reminded him that. I said, you know, as a fan, we really appreciated what you did.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, for sure. I think if I had the opportunity, I don't even know if I had the opportunity to stand in front of Mad Dog or any of my wrestling heroes for that matter, I don't know what I would even say to them. I think I would just be so starstruck. But it's nice to know that they do have that like humanistic side to them. That's really nice. One thing too that I read about was they have a documentary on the Vachon family, right?
Oh, it's wonderful. I did not realize that. His wife Dee reminded me of that. And I looked at the trailer, The Last Villains, because basically they're showing he's the last of the family, the wrestling family, that is still around. And I have not seen the film. The trailer is wonderful. The reviews were phenomenal. I read one today that was in the Calgary Herald that was just absolutely wonderful. And it's looks like Hollywood production. It really shows Paul in his later years now of, not what most wrestling fans will remember him of. And he seems quite pleased with it. Everybody'd like to have a legacy of their contributions in life. And this one really looks great.
Yeah. Where can we find that? Do you know?
In fact, I just wrote it down before I came on. I was looking at it again because it takes place it shows Las Vegas and some other places where Paul was at. He used to go to the Cauliflower banquets there. If you just Google the last villains, the Vachons, the trailer comes up, and definitely something worth watching.
Perfect. Absolutely. And one last thing I want to ask you, because you got to actually talk to him, and I know many people probably don't get the opportunity to talk to people like that. What is one thing you took away from the conversation that you'll probably always remember?
Well, what I got from him is what I get from so many of the other old timers. They really had pride in what they did to survive. Like he told me, he said, I put on about 80,000 miles a year on my car, because back then most of it was done by car. And even though he gave up pretty much his family life, his children, he didn't really spend any time with. They're spread out United States and in Canada. All the sacrifices, he said, I'd still do it all over again. And almost every one of these guys over the years, some of the people I was very close with was Killer Kowalski, Lou Thez, Al Costello of the Kangaroos, John Studd. These guys, even the pain that they had, the travel that they missed their kids' ball games and things, they still are proud of what they did, and they would do it over again. And I kind of cheer that in a way, because in your later years, you like to think that I made a difference somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, that the story was fantastic. I really enjoyed reading it.
Thank you.
So for everybody that wants to go and read it, you can check it out at slamwrestling.net, and it's right there on our news page. Don, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
Have a great day. That was Donny Laible. That was such a great conversation. I think I just got lucky this week that we had such a cool thing for me to mention. I mean, when my editor, Greg Oliver, told me that we were going to be running this story, I said, absolutely, I have to have him on. I want to know what this guy was like. Because of course, as I said, I was a big fan of Mad Dog. So very nice conversation there. So next, I have a very interesting guest. I'm sure you guys are going to love him. I first saw him in the ring about a year ago in December. And for everybody who likes hardcore matches, you're probably going to want to pay attention to this, because if there's anybody that knows about a hardcore match, it's our next guest. And he is the Green Phantom. Now, the Green Phantom has been basically with IWS since the beginning. He's a native from Montreal, and he's faced many, many opponents. He's fought people like Kevin Steen, also known as Kevin Owens, and of course, the late Brody Lee. He's held many titles as well in IWS. So again, without further ado, I'm going to bring him on the podcast for a quick chat here. Hi, Green Phantom.
Hey, how you doing? You like forgot to mention I'm the hardcore hero, the Canadian table breaker, the Montreal hardcore icon. But you've only just sort of met me, so I forgive you. And hey, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Well, for everybody else who doesn't know you, please introduce yourself.
Well, I just kind of did, I am the Canadian table breaker. I'm Montreal's hardcore icon. I'm the Green Phantom, been hanging and banging, rolling and rocking, shaking and baking, smashing and bashing for about 20 years now, mostly in the IWS, but definitely around the world. I made some splashes in the US at CZW, especially, and a couple of tournaments of death. But mostly my career has taken me here in Quebec and Montreal and Ontario for the most part. How are you, Alex? What are you doing on this fine Saturday night besides talking to wrestlers?
This is what I do. I do every Saturday. I come on here and I talk about wrestling. I mean, we can't do anything else, right? All of our shows were canceled, so we got to get it out somehow. So at least I have the opportunity to talk about wrestling every week, but you being a wrestler, you can't practice your sport, if you will. So how has this whole pandemic situation been like for you?
Oh, it's killing me. It's killing me. There's the passion I have for this wrestling, the release that is the wrestling, and being the Green Phantom is something that my soul needs. And there's only so many promos I can cut on life events and videos I can do about my dog. I need to get back to kicking someone's ass and smashing chairs over people's heads and breaking through tables, if you know what I mean. I'm missing that physical contact of smashing and bashing. But luckily you can get with the green in more ways than one. Every single day, every single way is what I like to say. But yeah, it's been torture. Thank God I have other interests as Green Phantom when it comes to the making of art, not just in the ring, But it's been horrible, and I'm not alone. All of my brothers and sisters in this wrestling world have been going through a lot, because people go through things and everyone copes with them differently. I cope with life by smashing and bashing, shaking and breaking, and unfortunately, I can't do much of that these days. So I'm rearing to go, baby.
Well, here's hoping that the pandemic is listening to you and will go away soon enough so that we can get back to doing our thing.
I did forgot to mention though that I did have one day of matches a couple of months ago for the IWS, of course, for our multiple TV shows around the world. I got to wrestle 3 times in one day. We did one full day of TV taping. And so those matches are going on right now on the Fight Network all over the world, and on RDS here in Quebec. Yeah.
Right. So tell me, what's it like wrestling without a crowd?
It's weird, man. Because I guess I'm going to toot my own horn, because that's what wrestling is all about. Is about glorifying yourself. Whenever I come to the ring, I mean, you witness it once or twice. The crowd goes wild. They pop, baby. They scream for me. They bang for me. They make a hella noise for your hardcore hero. And there was none of that. There was only the sound of my opponent screaming in pain, or my boot smashing to his face, or our bodies crashing on the ring, which are good sounds. But in the end, there's nothing quite like a holy shit, or Phantom's gonna kill you, or one of the other great things the fans say,
Definitely. Well, I know I've seen you get light bulbs smashed over your head. I've seen you go through tables. So tell me, why go the route of being a hardcore wrestler? What is it about it that drives you so much to it?
There's something in the violence, in the hardcoreness that really got like a chord ringing in my body. I've always been a kind of rough and tumble, bleed and speed kind of guy in my regular life, whether it be playing rugby or football, or just shenanigans with my friends growing up. I was always kind of the rough and tumble type. So when I first saw people smashing through tables, and even as a kid seeing just a chair being used, I was always like, ooh. I was always intrigued with that. So once I saw, the first time I laid my eyes on ECW in the late 90s, and I seen the tables being used, then I saw back in the day we're trading tapes, seeing these exploding rings in Japan and the barbed wire and stuff. That just blew my mind. And I just wanted to, I guess I'm kind of a jackass. I'm like, I want to get blown up. I want to get smashed through tables. I want to get maimed by barbed wire. I want to bust some glass over someone's face, just something really appealed to me. And I know I'm kind of typecast as a deathmatch hardcore wrestler, and I definitely am. I'm one of the best out there. But I like to think I'm much more versatile than that. I mean, I can have a match with anybody out there, whether and I have also. I am known as the hardcore hero, if you will, a deathmatch icon. But in the end, I can do it all, and I like it all. It just seems that in the beginning of my career, when I wasn't necessarily a very good wrestler, that's what got me over, is, you know, flying off a balcony or blowing myself up or some shit like that. Now that I'm a good wrestler, I can get over in other ways, but you know, I kind of got the bug, and whenever I see a table or a stack of tables or chairs, I feel like a little kid on a sandy beach that just built a nice sandcastle. You build that castle, and then you smash it to pieces, baby. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and look, I can see on the chat here, we've got some of your fans here. Get with the green, baby. That's awesome.
Green, baby. Yeah.
We also have Green Phantom #1. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is that #1 like this? Or is it #1 like this?
I think it's the first one. I think that suits you more anyway.
I will take it either way, baby. I'll take it either way.
So tell me, if you've wrestled, as you said, for 20 years, means you've had many, many opponents. Is there anybody you haven't faced so far that you would love to get your hands on and maybe throw through a table?
Oh, definitely. There's just so many, you know. I'm a huge fan of New Japan. I mean, yeah, I'm a huge fan of New Japan. I have to say, I don't really watch WWE that much anymore. I do watch it when Rami and Kevin, or Sammy and Kevin, as you know them, and also my buddies Everrise there, aka 2.0 from Montreal. They're going through the ranks at NXT. My buddy Drew Gulak, when he's wrestling in WWE, I watch them, but for the most part, I don't really care. So what I usually watch is my buddies on AEW, like the Dark Order there, and different guys there. Or mostly New Japan. That's, for me, that's where it's at. That's where the best competition, the best slam your body wrestling is going on these days. So you could name any guy out there I'd love to wrestle. You know, from Tanahashi to Suzuki. I just love these dudes, man. You know, this guy Toru Yano. I'd love to wrestle a match with these dudes.
Definitely. Definitely. So and
maybe a name that your viewers might maybe know more, I would say an AJ Styles, perhaps. I guess I'd like to have a match with him.
Yeah, no, I mean, I want to throw him through a table, so I can only imagine how you feel.
Yeah, baby. Yeah.
So when you walk down the street, full mask and everything, right? Of course.
Of course, man. I never take this thing off.
Exactly.
Why do I wear a mask, you ask? None of your freaking business.
So what do you tell people when you walk down the street then? Why, like, not when they say, why are you wearing a mask, or do they run the other way? Like, what's the reaction you get when you're not in front of a wrestling crowd?
Yeah, you know, when a 240-pound dude with a mask walks in the room, everyone gasps and hopes I don't kill them. And as far as walking down the street with it, honestly, my dog is so damn cute, some people don't even notice that I'm wearing a mask.
That must look pretty funny then, because you have a Dalmatian.
I do have a Dalmatian. He's the cutest thing. Thank God for the Dalmatian during this quarantine. He's really saved my life in being my companion, but also getting me out of the house and also giving me some Instagram content.
Yeah, definitely. I see a question here on our chat. So who was your favorite wrestler growing up?
Growing up, I have to say I was probably a Hulkamaniac, brother. But my room was full of half-naked, buffed-up, oiled men. Nothing homoerotic about that, I'm sure. But I liked them all. I was just so into it. I was a freaky kid. I had like 100 figures. My wall was plastered, but I was first and foremost a Hulkamaniac. But when I got back into wrestling later on, because I stopped watching it for a bit, when I got back into it, it was guys like a Sabu, a Mike Awesome, a Hayabusa. These guys really form me who I am. Honestly, if I were to ask you, or if I were to tell you what Green Phantom is as a wrestler and describe him in wrestlers, I would say he's part Hulk Hogan, part Mike Awesome, part Sabu. That is me. Right?
Yep, I definitely see that. So you mentioned that IWS was doing tapings without a crowd. Is there any more plan for that to go forward, or are we kind of just waiting to see what happens going forward with the pandemic?
Yeah, we're just waiting to see what happens, because there was a bunch of rules we had to follow in order to do that taping, and then really within a few, we just got under the wall per se, because as soon as we did that taping, the next like 2 days later, everything was shut down again. It was locked down. So we'll come February 8th, I think this current lockdown is supposed to end. So when that happens, we'll just see. I mean, you tell me what's going on. The government is kind of flipping flopping. Who knows what's going on, man? I really don't know, but I just can't wait.
No, I know. I can see it. You're itching to get back in the ring, and you can
see it. You can see
it.
Eh?
I can see it. I can see it in your eyes through the mask. It's very apparent for sure. So for any and all Green Phantom wrestling content, where can people find you on social media?
Well, obviously Green Phantom 514 on Instagram, and Green Phantom just like that on Facebook. And I'm old school, so I'm very new to the Twitter game. Green Phantom 514 again as well. When I first started this business, it was VHS tapes, and the internet was like just getting started. Now it's like it's just a whole new ball game, man. This Twitter thing has left me in the dust. I feel pathetic when I get on this Twitter game. I try to follow and comment here and there, but I was late in the game to get on Facebook. Now I was late in the game on getting Instagram. Now I'm late in the game and getting on Twitter. The next thing I'm just going to be really late for it. I don't know what to say, man. There's only so much this old bastard can get with,
So I guess the best content you're telling me is to actually see you in the ring. Then that would probably be the best way for people to really get a grasp on who you are. Yeah,
and that's the key. I mean, live Green Phantom is where it's at. The thing about me is not only do I do cool moves, but it's the energy I bring. It's the enthusiasm. I mean, it's palpable. People tell me whenever I come to the ring, they can feel it. The building shakes, not just because of the fans bashing on the ring and the fans going crazy, and me just jumping around and going crazy, feeling that green, getting with it. But I exude this energy. I'm very intense. I'm a very intense individual, and even though I cover my face up, that intensity exudes. And on the screen, it just doesn't do it justice. When people come to see me live, they become fans usually, unless they have some sort of preconceived notion about me, or they have some idea of what I was 20 years ago compared to what I am now. I'm a beast. I'm a monster. I look better than half the wrestlers out there. I have an amazing character, and I know how to hang and bang and smash and bash, baby. So definitely live is where it's at. Although, when's that going to happen? Unfortunately for all you fans, who knows when, baby. I mean, I guess I could go to the States and beat up some of my old friends down there, like Nick Gage and Matt Tremont, but then I'd have a problem coming back, you see, with this whole pandemic thing. And it's kind of hard seeing some of my buddies wrestling just simply because they're in the States and they're allowed that sort of thing, and I have to sit here at home and wishing I was in the ring with them, sweating and bleeding.
Definitely. Well, I mean, you do mention that we get to see all of these people wrestling in the States, and we in Quebec are in very strict lockdown. We can't even leave our house after 8 p.m. So, I mean, what are some of the things that you've seen in the last 20 years on the independent wrestling scene that people may not really know about? Because I know that we see WWE, we see Impact, we see AEW, but we don't always get to see what goes on behind the scenes in independent wrestling. So what's something that you think a lot of our viewers may not know about independent wrestling?
Well, that it's everywhere. I mean, you even said yourself, you only saw me for the first time last year. What the hell took you so long, man? Get with it. So, the independent scene is just, it's crazy. It's blown up too in the past couple of years. But I mean, in Montreal, nothing's going to beat the IWS. I mean, there will be wrestling shows around here and there, but nothing. I mean, the IWS is not just three letters and a bunch of wrestlers. It's also the fans that take part. They're really loyal. They're really hardcore. They're really full of love for us, and you can feel that when you come to a show. And independent wrestling, I mean, I don't want to say it's nothing like WWE, but there's a huge gap there, especially when it comes to the feeling and emotion within the room. I mean, when I think you were at was it Metropolis show I first met you at? I forget. Or maybe Club Unity. When these buildings are packed, I mean, the feeling is palpable. The energy is in the air. You can feel it, not just see it, but man, it's just an all-encompassing feeling. And when the crowd's screaming "Holy shit!" or just like, "That was awesome," or whatever they're doing, the crowd is a part of the show. Whereas WWE, not necessarily. I mean, there's some chance, but I mean, I guess that's the thing everyone's missing out on is the feeling of these athletes putting it all on the line and taking risks and doing things outside the box. It's not necessarily as formulaic as WWE. Shit'll happen that you didn't see coming. That's what everyone has to get on this bandwagon. That some of the best things in life are right under your damn nose, man. And trust me, you'd rather support some of these smaller time guys rather than a billionaire Vince or whatnot. For
Definitely.
your own sake.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Well, I know I was feeling the green when I did my very first promo with you at IWS, when you did yell at me for whatever reason it was. But nonetheless, it was so much fun.
I'm not really sorry about that, by the way.
I wouldn't expect you to be. I mean, we have to take a lot of abuse as backstage interviewers, so it is what it is. But I really want to thank you for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And hopefully I'll see you sometime soon, either at a live event, and maybe we can have you back on at the podcast at some point.
I would love to come back. I have tons of things to talk about, tons of stories, tons of things you didn't ask me about. There's so many things. I mean, just in this very room I'm standing in, I once walked down the stairs over here, and Jake the Snake Roberts and Jim the Anvil Neidhart were naked smoking crack. How about that story?
Oh.
One day I'll tell you all about it.
Well,
and yes, I hope to see you sometime in the future, and hope you all get to see me for your own good and the good of our well-being. Long live wrestling. Get with the green, baby.
Thank you so much, Green Phantom. That was the Green Phantom. Wow, a lot of energy coming from him. I didn't expect anything less because, as I said, I have worked with him before, but man, the energy, I love it. But yeah, very important topic, talking about independent wrestling. I mean, I know when I first started watching wrestling, of course, it was the WWE. And the whole reason, I think I've actually talked about it on the podcast before, the whole reason I got into wrestling was watching the women, naturally anyway. And I started to see what these women could do in the ring and how it was so empowering. And I loved, a lot of the messaging in the era that I was watching, that they were sending out to young girls, and I really appreciated it. And then I just fell in love with the action and fell in love with the sport. But what a lot of people don't see is the work that goes on at these independent shows. When I first started with IWS, you see how all of the wrestlers prepare for these events. You get to see everything that the WWE basically does, but on a smaller scale. And a lot of these people put their heart and souls into producing these shows. The camera people, the technical crew, me as a backstage interviewer, our promoter, everybody is just so into it. And it's so nice to see everybody really come together. And actually, I will be doing a story about independent wrestling very soon. You'll see that on slamwrestling.net, because I had the opportunity to sit down with David Marquez. Now, if you guys don't know who David Marquez is, he is basically, in my opinion anyway, one notch below Vince McMahon, because that man has done everything. He is the owner and founder of Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. So that's where they produce a lot of their shows. And he has produced so much talent. I mean, the Young Bucks. He's taught Orange Cassidy. You know, basically, a lot of what you see in AEW came from him. And I had a really nice conversation with him this week. And it was one of my favorite interviews because I don't think I've ever sat down with a promoter on such a large scale to talk about him. And the reason we were doing this was to talk about Championship Wrestling from Memphis, which will be starting February 14th. And he will be producing that show as well. So we went into, you know, the wrestling scene in Memphis and why there hasn't been a program there in 15 years. It was a very nice conversation just to start off with. And then we started talking about independent wrestling in general. And, you know, he was with NWA Power. So he talked to me a lot about that. And he talked to me a lot about his perspective on the business and the way that he sees things as a broadcaster, more so than just a wrestling promoter. And I also come from the broadcast world. I'm a radio producer, so I appreciate stuff like that. So it was a very nice conversation, and I'm very much looking forward to sharing that with you guys. And hopefully it'll inspire you to go and check out the rest of his content, because it really is interesting, and it's very different from what we normally see on primetime television. So if you have, you know, the Fight Network, or Fight TV, they do broadcast on there. So definitely check it out if you do have those channels. Now, as I promised you, we're going to be talking about the Royal Rumble. So this probably, aside from WrestleMania, I would say the Royal Rumble is my absolute favorite pay-per-view. I actually just finished watching, and I'm not kidding when I say this, I went from Royal Rumble #1 right till last year. I watched them all consecutively. It took a couple weekends, but I watched all of them from start to finish. And wow, I mean, the different times that, you know, you watch them, it's so different, because I was so used to watching, you know, the more recent ones, but then you go back into the 80s and then the 90s and the early 2000s, and you see what kind of surprises and what kind of comes out there. So it was really interesting to kind of go back and see the legends that came out and the surprises. You know, like one of the biggest surprises I think that came to my mind was in 1999 when China came out and wrestled in the men's Royal Rumble. I mean, wow. I mean, the first time we're basically seeing a woman, if I'm not mistaken anyway, in a Royal Rumble match with the men. And of course, you know, she killed it as much as she could. And then we saw the same thing happen last year at the Royal Rumble when Nia Jax came in and started throwing out bodies over the top rope. And that's awesome to me, that the fact that you can kind of go back and forth and see what the women can do and how they can actually hold their own in the ring. So I started thinking about who else in the WWE from the women's roster, who could be able to take on the men. And I'm going through the roster and I'm thinking, what would be so awesome is if Ronda Rousey makes a comeback and she not only goes into the women's Royal Rumble, but also goes into the men's Royal Rumble. I think she would absolutely kill it. I think the fans would be all about it. Whether or not, you know, I'm pretty sure we all know by now that there's not going to be actual fans. It's going to be all virtual. But I think had there been fans in the audience, I think they would just love it. So she was one of the other ones. I think also maybe Charlotte Flair too. I could see her going in there. Shayna Baszler could definitely hold her own. We know that there's nothing short of surprises with the WWE when it comes to the Royal Rumble. So those are some of the things that I was thinking of. And last year was actually one of my favorite Royal Rumbles. And it's not because it was one of my newer ones watching it. It was one of the first times where I watched it as a journalist as opposed to just a fan. And I was talking to one of my good friends who is also a wrestling journalist, and I told him that I thought Drew McIntyre would win the Royal Rumble. And he told me, no, there's no way, he's not getting a push. But there was something in me that I was like, there's definitely something. He's going to do something. He's either going to get to the very end and he's going to get thrown over, or he's going to win the whole thing. Lo and behold, we have Brock Lesnar, Drew McIntyre, and Ricochet in the ring. And what happens? Brock Lesnar gets Claymore kicked over the top rope, lands on the ground, crowd goes wild, and Alex was right. I could not believe that I actually guessed it, but I don't know that I'll get lucky enough this year. I'm kind of torn as to who I think would win the men's Royal Rumble. But I do see some of you commenting about who would win the women's. Bianca Belair, from what I'm seeing on the chat, that's more or less what everybody thinks. I mean, she's a dominant player. I don't think there's anybody that could say that she's not a dominant player. We've been seeing, in the Survivor Series where they did Raw versus SmackDown, and I believe she was on the SmackDown team, and she was really holding her own. And I think, when we watched her in NXT, we saw she was a dominant force there too. So it really wouldn't surprise me if they gave her a little bit of a push and went up against Asuka. I mean, I think that would be a tremendous match. For the men's, I was seeing a lot of people all over social media and people that I've been talking to, they're thinking maybe Daniel Bryan might win the Royal Rumble. I would say he's probably a crowd favorite. There's nothing wrong with that. Although I think, in my opinion, it would be great to have somebody else be pushed towards the title. I think, that it would be nice to have somebody new, somebody fresh, and maybe another surprise. I mean, we don't know, right? Surprises happen all the time. Did anybody ever think that Edge was going to make his return at the Royal Rumble last year? I don't think so. At least at my watch party, nobody thought so, because immediately when he came in, everybody stood up and was going wild. So, and I know that was the same case when we were watching it live in the audience. It was quite something to watch. Somebody else that might be a surprise coming back into the Royal Rumble would be Seth Rollins. We haven't been seeing him too much lately. We know why Becky Lynch is not here, but we haven't been seeing him so much. So maybe this is when he's going to make his return, and maybe he's going to make a statement, and maybe he could win the whole thing. I mean, that's also a possibility too. Have him go on and go wrestle in WrestleMania in the main event. I mean, who knows, right? So that too was also on my mind. Richard says, I'd love Walter to win, but I don't think he wants to leave Europe. You know what? I kind of agree with that. I mean, I don't know that he would want to leave Europe either, although how awesome would it be to have him there? I mean, force to be reckoned with. He is a monster of a man. So I wouldn't be surprised too if they had NXT UK wrestlers come over and join the Royal Rumble. Another thing that kind of touched on it before, Brock Lesnar. Now, we don't really know what's going on there. I don't know how you guys feel about seeing Brock Lesnar come back into the Royal Rumble. What I would not want to see is he comes back and he wins. Because in my opinion, I don't think he's a very good champion. I mean, he really only wrestles in main pay-per-views. And I want a champion that's going to come on a Monday Night Raw, come on to a SmackDown, and lay an open challenge, or have a title match to really prove themselves. So I don't think Brock is one of those people. So if he does come back, all I say is I hope he doesn't win. Another guest we have here, how about Otis? Otis, yes. We did see Otis at WrestleMania this past year in his storyline with Mandy Rose, which I absolutely loved, by the way. And Otis is such a character. I mean, I laugh every time he comes on screen. I mean, his feud that he had with The Miz and the Money in the Bank, that was absolutely great. And we know he can definitely throw over some guys. So I wouldn't be surprised either. Although what would be interesting is if he gets down to the very last, I would say maybe 2 or 3, And then his former partner comes in and throws him over the top rope, starts a new storyline. So that's also a possibility. Others that I think on the women's side, just touching on that. So we mentioned Bianca Belair, but another one that we're kind of seeing getting a push is Alexa Bliss. Now, what I'm thinking could be a possibility is having Alexa Bliss win the women's and have the Fiend win the men's. I mean, I always saw Bray Wyatt as a title holder. He is such an amazing character. This whole Firefly Funhouse situation, the fire. I know John is not a huge fan of the fire, but I know it really gets over, and it's still continuing. We saw Randy Orton this week with a mask on because he got burned last week by Alexa Bliss. And we know that this week also Alexa Bliss did say that she was going to be entering the Royal Rumble. So that's a very big possibility too. I mean, they're kind of tagged up together. So it would almost be like an interesting faction. And then maybe they could start a new storyline with them being the wrestling royalty of Raw. How about that? So yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. I mean, one entrant that I think deserves a title shot in the women's that, you know, we haven't really seen a lot of lately. And she's somebody that's clearly very well respected in the locker room is Natalya. Every time Natalya comes out, I've always loved Natalya, and I never thought that she got the push that she deserved. She is wrestling royalty, you know? So, I mean, like, why not? Why not have her as a title holder now anyway? I know she was at one time, but it was very, very short-lived, too short-lived in my opinion. So that's also something to consider. And then, you know, we've also seen on the women's side, as we've seen on the men's side, there's been surprises from the past. So are there any women or men from the past that maybe you would like to see in the Royal Rumble this year? One that actually just came to mind, and I say this because I saw it on social media this week, that she is asking for her retirement match. Wink, wink. Alundra Blaze. How about that? Imagine if she came into the Women's Royal Rumble, she would throw everybody out. I would love to see her come into the ring and finally get an opportunity to be the women's champion once again. Can you imagine having Asuka and Alundra Blaze at WrestleMania? I think that's a pretty good headliner. But if anybody has any other thoughts here, Dan says, the Royal Rumble is my favorite event too. I think the Royal Rumble is either 1992 or 2001. Yes, I mean, definitely the Royal Rumbles from the past have definitely been better, in my opinion, than they have been recently, except for last year, I would say. And Dan's also saying, I don't expect many surprises this year, unfortunately. I mean, I could have said the same thing last year, and here we are, right? So, I mean, anything is possible. So many things happen in the WWE that even I don't understand and don't foresee. So really, I would say, you know, really think about it this week. I know I will. I know I will be making my pick days before we even get to the event. Well, I'm looking at the clock and we only have 2 minutes left in the show. That went by so fast, but I just want to say thank you to everybody who joined me. This was a great first time for me. I really enjoyed bringing you the guests that we had on today. Thank you so much to Don for sharing his amazing story on the Butcher, Paul Vachon. And thank you to the Green Phantom for bringing so much energy to the podcast as well. And thank you to you guys. You guys are the ones that we do this for. So thank you so much. And I will be back next week, and John will be back next week, and maybe he'll give us a little bit of insight as to why he wasn't with us and what he was doing. So thank you everybody once again. And I will bring you the news next week, and hopefully I will have my Royal Rumble picks for you. Thanks everybody. Have a great evening.